Give me the card back." Ava Collins didn't. Instead, she slid the matte black credit card back across the worn wooden counter with 2 fingers, as casually as if she were returning a library card. "It keeps getting declined." The tall, devastatingly handsome customer reached into his coat for cash, but before he could pull out a single bill, someone near the doorway gasped loud enough to silence every page turning in the bookstore. "That's Roman DeLuca." The name spread through the room like a dropped match. America's most feared mafia boss. Every pair of eyes shifted to Ava, waiting for panic. She simply folded her arms. "I don't care if you own half the city," she said evenly. "Either pay another way or leave the books." No one breathed. Roman quietly counted the cash onto the counter, gathered the novels without another word, and walked out. 30 minutes later, a 15-second video appeared online. By sunset, thousands of strangers had convinced themselves the Curvy Bookstore owner had just flirted with the Mafia Boss. Neither of them realized they had just become the city's favorite love story. The bookstore had always been quiet enough for people to hear pages turning. That afternoon, silence meant something entirely different. For several long seconds after Roman DeLuca walked out the door, nobody moved. The tiny bell above the entrance gave one last, gentle ring before settling back into stillness. Yet the tension he left behind lingered between the crowded shelves. Only after his black sedan disappeared around the corner did conversations begin again. They started as whispers. "I can't believe that was him. Did she seriously tell Roman DeLuca to leave? I thought she was going to apologize. I thought someone was going to die." Ava sighed and began arranging the stack of cash beside the register before placing it into the drawer. "He bought 12 books," she muttered to herself. That's all that happened. To her, it really was. Customers came into the shop every day with different wallets, different jobs, different attitudes. Some wore expensive suits, some paid in loose change. Some stayed for hours reading the first chapter before deciding against a purchase. Money never interested Ava. Books did. She picked up the declined credit card receipt, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. The transaction was finished. Or so she believed. Across the street, however, someone had already replayed a short phone recording 3 times. The video had begun only after the card machine displayed its error message. It completely missed Roman calmly reaching for cash. It also cut off before he paid. Instead, the recording showed only the bookstore owner sliding an impossibly expensive black card back across the counter while saying, "Either pay another way or leave the books." Then the camera swung toward the whisper, spreading through the room. "That's Roman DeLuca." The clip ended there. 15 seconds. No context, no conclusion. Exactly the sort of video the internet loved. Within minutes, it landed on several local social media pages. The captions grew more dramatic every time someone reposted it. Bookstore owner humiliates billionaire. Woman rejects mafia boss in public. Only person brave enough to embarrass Roman DeLuca. By late afternoon, strangers who had never stepped inside the bookstore were confidently explaining what had happened. Most of them were wrong. Ava remained blissfully unaware. She spent the next hour repairing the torn spine of a first-edition travel journal while helping an elderly customer search for forgotten poetry collections. When the older woman finally left, the front door opened again. 3 college students walked in together. None of them looked at the books. Instead, they looked directly at Ava. "So," one of them asked with an excited grin, "what's he really like?" Ava blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Roman DeLuca, the mafia boss. Were you scared?" She frowned. "Should I have been?" The 3 exchanged disappointed glances, as though she had ruined the ending of a movie. One reluctantly bought a $5 paperback before leaving. Outside, Another customer was already walking toward the entrance. Then another. By closing time, more people had visited than on most Saturdays. Yet very few purchased anything. Most wandered around pretending to browse while stealing curious glances at the register where the famous encounter had supposedly happened. Ava locked the front door with a puzzled expression. "I sold fewer books than usual," she murmured, studying the day's receipts. "How is that even possible with twice as many customers?" She chalked it up to coincidence. The answer arrived the following morning. She unlocked the store just before 9. By 9:15, every chair near the front window was occupied. People photographed the counter. People whispered while pointing toward the entrance. Someone asked if this was the place from the video. Another customer purchased a worn detective novel simply because Ava had touched it while answering a question. At 10 o'clock, a young woman wearing oversized sunglasses walked in, bought nothing, filmed 5 seconds of the shelves, smiled knowingly at Ava, and whispered, "Good luck with your boyfriend." "My what?" "The Mafia Boss." Before Ava could respond, the woman had already uploaded another video. The rumors had evolved overnight. Apparently, the confrontation had become flirting. The refusal had become chemistry. The declined card had become the beginning of an impossible romance. Ava rested both hands on the counter and stared at the growing line of curious visitors. She had spent nearly 10 years trying to convince people that independent bookstores still mattered. Somehow, it had taken one declined credit card to make the entire city notice. And she wasn't sure whether to laugh or panic. Roman DeLuca had built an empire on knowing when people were lying. He could usually tell before they finished their first sentence. His advisors lied to protect him. His competitors lied to manipulate him. Reporters lied to create headlines. Politicians lied because it was convenient. The woman who owned the little second-hand bookstore had done something far more unusual. She hadn't cared enough to lie at all. 3 days after the video spread across the city, Roman found himself staring at a stack of old novels on the corner of his office desk, instead of the financial reports waiting for his signature. A leather-bound copy of The Count of Monte Cristo rested on top. Beneath it sat 11 more books that still carried tiny handwritten price stickers from Ava's store. His chief of security glanced at them before clearing his throat. "Sir." Roman looked up. "The car is ready." Roman nodded, but his attention drifted back to the books. For years he had collected first editions and rare historical texts in complete secrecy. His library occupied an entire floor of his private residence, yet almost no one had ever seen it. Reading belonged to the part of his life he refused to show. People feared Roman DeLuca. They did not imagine him spending quiet evenings comparing translations of Homer or rereading 19th century novels. He preferred it that way. Unfortunately, every time he looked at the books from Ava's store, he remembered her expression. No fear, no admiration, no attempt to impress him. Just mild impatience because his payment hadn't gone through. It was strangely refreshing. His phone buzzed. Marco, one of his oldest advisors, appeared on the screen. "You've seen the internet?" "I have." "They think you're dating." Roman pinched the bridge of his nose. "They're wrong?" "I know they're wrong." Marco paused. "The problem is, nobody else does." Roman opened another headline. "Mafia Boss secretly courting Curvy Bookstore owner." Another. "Love story or power play." Another. "The only woman who isn't afraid of Roman DeLuca." He closed the phone. "This is ridiculous," Marco smiled. "So go tell her." Roman looked up. "Tell her what?" "That you're sorry," Roman frowned. "For what?" "For accidentally turning her bookstore into a tourist attraction." Across town, Ava was discovering just how exhausting accidental fame could become. Someone asked where Roman usually stood. Someone else wanted a selfie behind the register. A pair of teenagers bought 2 books they admitted they never intended to read, simply because this was the Mafia Bookstore. Every time Ava corrected them, another customer repeated the rumor. She had never worked harder. She had also never been more irritated. Books disappeared from the shelves faster than ever, but too many customers treated the shop like an attraction instead of a bookstore. Late that afternoon, the front bell chimed again. Without looking up from a box of newly restored classics, Ava spoke automatically. If you're here to ask whether Roman DeLuca has been back, the answer is no. Silence. She looked up. Roman stood in front of the counter. Oh. For the first time since they met, he looked almost uncomfortable. I seem to have chosen unfortunate timing. You think? I do. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Roman placed a small paper bag on the counter. I came to apologize. Ava blinked. For your credit card? For everything that happened afterward. She studied him carefully. You uploaded the video? No. You told people we were secretly in love? Certainly not. Then what exactly are you apologizing for? Roman considered the question. My existence appears to have complicated your business. Despite herself, Ava laughed. It escaped before she could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. That's the strangest apology I've ever heard. It is also sincere. She folded her arms. I believe you. The tension eased almost instantly. Roman pushed the paper bag toward her. I brought back one of the novels. She frowned. You didn't like it? I finished it. Already? I read quickly. She opened the bag. Inside was the restored copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Carefully tucked beside it was a handwritten list. 6 more titles. Ava stared at him. You came to apologize. Yes. And somehow left yourself another shopping list? Roman looked at the paper as though noticing it for the first time. It would appear so. She couldn't help smiling. I suppose I should find these for you. I would appreciate that. 20 minutes later, 6 more books sat neatly stacked on the counter. Roman examined each one with obvious interest. You actually read these? Ava asked. I do. History. Mostly. Classics. Frequently. You don't seem like someone who enjoys novels. I've been told I don't seem like someone who enjoys anything. That earned him another laugh. As she totaled the purchase, Ava shook her head. You know, most people buy 1 book to see if they like an author. I've never been particularly patient. No, she admitted. I noticed. She handed him the receipt. This time, Roman didn't reach for the black credit card. Instead, he quietly counted cash onto the counter. Ava looked at the bills, then at him. You know, your card might actually work today. I'm aware. So why cash? Roman's expression remained perfectly calm. It seems less memorable. She raised an eyebrow. I think it's a little late for that. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted into the faintest smile. As he walked toward the door carrying another impossible stack of books, Ava realized something unexpected. She had spent nearly half an hour talking to the most feared man in America. Almost none of the conversation had been about crime. It had been about books. Unfortunately, 3 customers had watched every second, and each of them was already reaching for a phone. The following Monday, the bookstore felt almost normal again. Almost. The line outside no longer stretched halfway down the block, but curious visitors still wandered through the narrow aisles, hoping to witness another unforgettable encounter. Most left disappointed. Roman didn't appear. Tuesday passed, then Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, Ava had finally convinced herself that the strange chapter of her life was ending. She found, to her own surprise, that the realization was slightly disappointing, not because she believed the ridiculous rumors, but because their conversations about books had become the most unexpectedly enjoyable part of her week. She quickly dismissed the thought. He was simply a customer, an unusually famous one. Nothing more. Instead, she threw herself into preparing for the neighborhood reading festival that the local business association organized every autumn. Independent bookstores rarely attracted much attention, so the event mattered. If enough families attended, several small shops could survive another difficult winter. That afternoon, another bookstore owner arrived carrying 2 heavy boxes filled with donated children's novels. Ethan Morris looked permanently cheerful, as though life had personally apologized to him for every inconvenience. Please tell me these stairs got shorter. They didn't. I was hoping. Ava laughed and helped him carry the boxes inside. Ethan owned another independent bookstore across town. They had spent years recommending customers to each other whenever one store lacked a particular title. Competition never made sense to either of them. Readers eventually bought more books when bookstores worked together instead of treating each other as enemies. As they sorted donations across the large wooden table, Ethan held up a faded mystery novel. Festival prize? No. Why not? The ending is terrible. You've said that about 6 different books, because 6 different authors disappointed me. Ethan grinned. You know that's why people keep coming back here, right? My devastating customer service. No. You remember every book they've ever hated. She shrugged. Life's too short for disappointing endings. Neither of them noticed someone had paused outside the front window. A black sedan stood quietly across the street. Inside, Roman DeLuca stared through the glass. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror. We can leave if you'd prefer. Roman didn't answer immediately. He watched Ava laughing at something Ethan had said while they arranged books together. She looked relaxed, comfortable. Nothing like the guarded expression she wore whenever strangers entered, hoping for gossip instead of literature. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight unsettled him. Not because Ethan had done anything inappropriate, simply because making Ava laugh seemed effortless. Roman disliked that realization far more than he should have. His phone buzzed. Marco, you're outside the bookstore again, aren't you? Roman looked toward the dashboard camera. How do you know where I am? Because security informed me. They monitor my schedule. They monitor your increasingly suspicious interest in second-hand bookstores. Roman remained silent. Marco sighed. You've visited 4 times in 2 weeks. I've purchased books. You've purchased 24 books. I read. You also own the largest private library I've ever seen. Roman looked back toward the window. I require additional shelves. You require honesty. Roman ended the call. 5 minutes later, he stepped out of the car. The bell above the bookstore door rang. Ava looked up first. So, she said without missing a beat, did you actually finish the 6 books? Roman placed 2 finished novels on the counter. I did. Ethan's eyebrows rose. You read those in less than a week? Roman nodded. Ethan extended a friendly hand. Ethan Morris. Roman accepted the handshake. Roman. I know. The silence that followed lasted just long enough to become awkward. Ava rescued the conversation. Ethan's helping with the reading festival. Roman glanced toward the stacks of donated books. I see. Ethan smiled. You read much? Before Roman could answer, Ava spoke first. Apparently enough to keep my business alive. Roman looked at her. I thought you disliked wealthy customers. I dislike wealthy customers who think money replaces personality. And me? You argue about literature. She considered him for a moment. That's significantly better. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly dropped a box of paperbacks. Roman wasn't entirely certain why, but hearing another man make Ava laugh again irritated him far more than it should have. The feeling was unfamiliar. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without raising his pulse. Yet watching Ethan casually tease Ava made him strangely restless. Trying to ignore it, Roman picked up one of the festival flyers. You expect many visitors? We hope so, Ava replied. The neighborhood needs something that isn't another food festival. Roman nodded thoughtfully. I'll stay out of the way. You don't have to. I suspect my presence attracts the wrong audience. She couldn't argue. He was right. Even now, 2 pedestrians had slowed outside after recognizing him through the front window. One immediately lifted a phone. Roman quietly placed the flyer back on the table. I should leave. Before anyone could stop him, he purchased 3 more novels, paid in cash once again, and walked toward the exit. Ethan watched him disappear through the glass door. Then he turned to Ava with a grin that was impossible to misinterpret. So, she sighed. No, you didn't even let me finish. I know exactly what you were going to ask. And the answer is still no. Ethan folded his arms. The man bought 3 books he didn't even come here for. He came for books. He came for you. Ava busied herself rearranging a display that didn't need rearranging. Across the street, Roman's bodyguards loaded another stack of novels into the trunk. One finally looked at the other and whispered, Do you think the boss has developed an unhealthy interest in bookstores? The second guard glanced at the growing collection. I stopped believing this was about books sometime around novel number 20. Roman heard every word. He pretended he hadn't. For the first time in years, America's most feared mafia boss found himself unable to decide which was more dangerous, the rumors everyone else believed, or the possibility that they were beginning to contain a very small amount of truth. The reading festival was only 3 days away when Vanessa Pierce finally decided the bookstore was fashionable enough to visit. She arrived with a camera crew, a stylist, and the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to every room becoming quieter the moment she entered it. Her designer heels clicked across the old wooden floor while her assistant filmed every shelf from multiple angles. None of them reached for a single book. Ava noticed immediately. She was helping a little girl choose her first mystery novel when Vanessa approached the register with an immaculate smile. So this is where the magic happened. Ava looked up. I'm sorry? The famous bookstore. Vanessa slowly removed her sunglasses, the one that caught Roman DeLuca. Several customers immediately turned toward the counter. Ava forced herself to remain calm. You'll have to be more specific. Vanessa laughed softly. The internet certainly has. Without waiting for permission, she turned toward her camera. We're here with everyone's favorite bookstore owner. She extended one elegant hand toward Ava. The Mafia Boss's little book girl. A few people chuckled. Others lifted their phones. Ava had spent weeks rebuilding the bookstore's reputation as a place for readers instead of rumors. In 5 careless words, Vanessa had undone much of that work. Still, Ava refused to react emotionally. She finished wrapping the child's purchase before speaking. My name is Ava Collins. Of course. I've owned this bookstore for almost 10 years. Vanessa smiled politely. And now, everyone finally knows it. The implication was obvious. Without Roman, nobody would have cared. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Ethan, who had been arranging festival posters near the front window, stopped what he was doing. Ava rested both hands on the counter. Her voice remained steady. This bookstore existed before Roman DeLuca walked through that door. She met Vanessa's eyes. It will still exist if he never comes back. The room fell silent. Vanessa tilted her head. That's a lovely sentiment. It's also true. But surely you've benefited from the attention. I've benefited from people discovering books. Ava looked around the room. I hope they come back because they found stories they love. Not because they're hoping to photograph someone else's life. The answer wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was honest. Ironically, honesty often carried further than outrage. Vanessa's smile stiffened. Before she could reply, the bell above the entrance rang. Nobody needed to look twice. Roman DeLuca had returned. He paused just inside the doorway, after immediately sensing the unusual silence. His gaze moved from the filming equipment to Vanessa, then finally to Ava. Something had happened. He simply didn't know what. Vanessa recovered first. Perfect timing. She beamed toward the camera. Now we have both halves of our favorite internet couple. Roman's expression never changed. I'm afraid you've misunderstood. Oh? I came to buy books. She laughed. That's adorable. The word lingered in the air, longer than it should have. Roman slowly walked toward the counter. Instead of browsing the shelves, he stopped beside Ava. He looked at the camera, then at Vanessa. You suggested this business became successful because of me. Vanessa nodded confidently. I think everyone would agree. Roman considered her statement for a brief moment. No. His voice remained quiet. Calm. Controlled. Which somehow made every word carry more weight. I invest in hundreds of companies. He folded his hands behind his back. Technology firms. Hotels. Shipping. Real estate. Publishing. My investment office maintains a portfolio worth several $billion. He paused. This bookstore is not part of it. The silence deepened. I have never financed it. I have never purchased an ownership share. I have never paid its employees. I have never covered its expenses. Roman glanced toward the worn shelves surrounding them. Everything you see here. He turned toward Ava. She built herself. No grand declaration followed. No romantic speech. No dramatic defense. Just facts. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. The effect was immediate. Even Vanessa seemed momentarily unsure how to continue. Someone near the history section quietly started clapping. Another customer joined. Then another. Within seconds, applause spread through the bookstore. Not for Roman. For Ava. She looked visibly embarrassed by the attention. I really don't think this is necessary. It probably is, Ethan said from across the room. You've spent years earning this. The applause slowly faded. Vanessa lowered her phone. For the first time since arriving, she seemed to realize she had misjudged the room. She offered a polite smile that failed to reach her eyes. Well, I think we've captured everything, she signaled to her crew. Within moments, they were gone. The bookstore felt noticeably lighter. Ava let out a slow breath. I didn't ask you to do that. Roman nodded. I know. So why did you? He glanced around at the shelves. Because people should receive credit for the work they actually did. She looked at him for several long seconds. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she reached beneath the counter and produced a newly restored first edition. I've been saving this. Roman accepted it carefully. You thought I'd like it? I knew you would. He smiled faintly. You've become rather good at recommending books. I remember what my customers enjoy. There it was again. Customers. Not billionaire. Not Mafia Boss. Just another reader. Roman realized he had begun looking forward to hearing her call him exactly that. Unfortunately, outside the bookstore, Someone had already uploaded another video. This one showed only Roman publicly praising Ava while she handed him a carefully chosen book. The caption appeared less than 10 minutes later. The Mafia Boss just defended his girlfriend in public. By evening, the rumors were larger than ever.
The reading festival ended with more visitors than anyone had expected. Children left carrying worn adventure novels tucked beneath their arms. Retired teachers donated boxes of forgotten classics. Several local businesses agreed to sponsor next year's event. For the first time in years, Ava allowed herself to believe the bookstore might actually survive. Unfortunately, the internet had reached an entirely different conclusion. Every photograph from the festival seemed to feature Roman somewhere in the background. If he stood beside a bookshelf, they called it romantic. If he carried a stack of novels, they called it thoughtful. If he happened to smile at Ava, headlines immediately transformed an ordinary moment into another chapter of their imaginary relationship. The rumors refused to disappear. They simply became more creative. One evening, Ava sat alone behind the register after closing, scrolling through endless comments she knew she shouldn't read. Some insisted she had planned everything from the beginning. Others claimed she had trapped one of the richest men in America with clever publicity. A few accused her of pretending to love books simply because it looked charming online. She locked her phone and slid it into a drawer. None of those strangers knew how many winters she had nearly closed the bookstore. None of them remembered the years when she barely sold enough books to pay the electricity bill. One viral video had somehow erased an entire decade of quiet perseverance. The bell above the door rang. Roman stepped inside, carrying no shopping bag for the first time. He immediately noticed the exhaustion on her face. "You closed 10 minutes ago." "I know. I can leave." She shook her head. "No." He remained near the entrance, giving her space. What happened? She considered pretending everything was fine. Instead, she surprised herself. "I'm tired." Roman waited, not interrupting, not offering advice, just listening. "I'm tired of every customer wondering whether you're coming. I'm tired of every interview asking about you instead of the bookstore. I'm tired of people acting as though I only exist because you walked through that door one afternoon." She laughed quietly, though there was very little humor in it. "I spent years trying to become known as the woman who remembers everyone's favorite books." Her eyes drifted toward the shelves. "Now I'm apparently famous for processing the wrong credit card." Roman looked around the familiar room. He suddenly understood something he had been trying not to acknowledge. Every visit made things harder for her, not easier. He had told himself he was supporting a local bookstore. In reality, his presence prevented people from seeing anything except him. Finally, he spoke. "What would help?" Ava answered almost immediately. "I think—" She hesitated. "I think you should stop coming." The words hung painfully between them. Not because they were cruel, because they were honest. Roman nodded once. "If that's what you need, it is." She looked down at the counter. "I don't dislike you. I know. I actually—" She searched for the right words. "I've enjoyed arguing with you about books." "So have I. But every time you walk through that door, another rumor starts." Roman glanced toward the front window, where two people had already slowed their pace after recognizing his car outside. She was right. Even now. "I understand." He reached into his coat. For a moment, Ava expected another reading list. Instead, he placed a library card-sized piece of paper on the counter. It contained only one sentence. "Thank you for treating me like an ordinary customer." He turned toward the door. Ava almost stopped him. Almost. Instead, she simply watched him leave. The bell chimed softly behind him. Then the bookstore became very quiet. The following weeks felt strangely empty. Business remained steady. People gradually stopped asking when Roman would return. The internet discovered newer stories to chase. For the first time since the famous video, Ava could recommend books without cameras appearing over her shoulder. Everything she wanted had finally happened. So why did the bookstore suddenly feel larger than before? She noticed little absences everywhere. Nobody questioned her recommendation of classic Russian novels. Nobody argued that detective fiction deserved more respect than literary fiction. Nobody bought 6 books at once. She found herself setting aside history books out of habit, before remembering there was no one coming to collect them. Even Ethan noticed. "You've been staring at that empty corner for 5 minutes." "I have not." "You have." She smiled weakly. "I'm just thinking." "About Roman?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. One rainy afternoon, she discovered a mystery novel with a folded note tucked inside. It had been returned anonymously through the overnight book slot. Inside, in neat handwriting, were only 4 words. "Your recommendation was correct. No signature, none was necessary." She smiled despite herself. Weeks passed. Autumn surrendered to early winter. Then, one quiet evening, just as Ava was preparing to lock the front door, the familiar bell rang once more. Roman stood inside the entrance. He wasn't carrying a shopping list. He wasn't holding a stack of finished novels. His hands were empty. Ava looked around instinctively. "No bodyguards? They're outside." "No books?" "No." She frowned. "You didn't come for books." Roman met her eyes. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, with the same calm certainty he used when stating undeniable facts, he answered, "No." A faint smile touched his face. "I came for you." Ava felt every carefully built defense she had relied on for weeks become suddenly, dangerously fragile.
Several months later, the little bookstore no longer depended on curiosity to keep its lights on. It depended on readers. The tourists eventually disappeared. The influencers chased newer trends. The headlines found fresher scandals. What remained were people who returned because someone behind the counter remembered exactly which stories had made them laugh, cry, or stay awake long after midnight. Ava finally recognized most of the faces walking through the front door again. That was the success she had always wanted. Not fame, familiarity. The neighborhood reading festival became a monthly book club. Parents who had discovered the shop by accident now brought their children every weekend. College students argued over classic literature in the reading corner. Retirees donated boxes of forgotten novels instead of throwing them away. The bookstore had survived, not because a billionaire rescued it, not because the internet briefly made it famous, but because people had rediscovered why it existed in the first place. Stories. One chilly Saturday afternoon, Ethan carried in another box of donated books and looked around the crowded shop. "You know," he said, "I think we might actually run out of shelf space." Ava smiled. "That's the nicest problem I've ever had. It beats wondering whether you'll make rent. It definitely does." Ethan glanced toward the entrance. "So," she laughed before he finished, "he's coming. You knew exactly what I was going to ask. I've gotten good at reading people. Except mystery novel enthusiasts." She rolled her eyes. "Don't start." The bell above the door chimed almost on cue. Roman DeLuca stepped inside, wearing a dark wool coat instead of his usual tailored suit. He no longer paused awkwardly near the entrance. He simply walked toward the history section as though he had done it 100 times. Because he had. Several customers recognized him. None of them reached for a camera. Most simply nodded politely before returning to their books. That change pleased Ava more than she expected. He had become part of the bookstore instead of the spectacle surrounding it. Roman eventually arrived at the register carrying 3 novels. Ava examined the stack. A naval history. He nodded. A biography. Another nod. And somehow, she lifted the final book. Another terrible mystery novel. It received excellent reviews. It has an ending you can predict by chapter 3. I remain optimistic. You remain wrong. A teenage customer nearby laughed quietly. Roman looked completely unbothered. I'll take the risk. You always do. As Ava wrapped the books, the familiar ease between them felt entirely ordinary. Neither of them seemed interested in performing for anyone else. There were no dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just 2 people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. When she finished packing the books, she looked up with an expression that was equal parts amusement and mischief. I have an important question. Roman waited. She reached into the cash drawer before resting one elbow on the counter. So, his eyebrow lifted slightly. Does your credit card still work? The customers closest to the register smiled, recognizing the reference. Roman's expression softened into a genuine smile. It does. Ava looked at the folded bills already waiting in his hand. Then why are you still paying cash? For a moment, he simply watched her. Months earlier, he would have searched for the safest possible answer. Now he chose the honest one. Because the first time I used cash here, he gently placed the money on the counter. I accidentally found something worth much more. Ava's teasing smile faded into something quieter. Warmer. He held her gaze. The books were just the beginning. Silence settled over the bookstore. Not an uncomfortable silence, the peaceful kind that belonged in places where stories lived. Ava walked around the counter. She stopped beside him, instead of behind the register that had separated them since the day they first met. You know, she said softly, your taste in mystery novels is still terrible. I've accepted that. You'll probably lose every literary argument we ever have. I expect to. And you'll keep buying more books than you can finish. I already have. She laughed. So nothing's changed. Roman shook his head. One thing has. What? I no longer need an excuse to come here. For the first time, Ava reached for his hand without hesitation. She intertwined her fingers with his. Neither of them noticed the elderly customer smiling from the poetry section. Neither of them noticed Ethan quietly pretending to reorganize books while grinning to himself. The bookstore continued exactly as it always had. Pages turned. Customers browsed. Someone discovered a favorite author for the first time. Outside, the city hurried past, without realizing that the story everyone had once misunderstood had finally become true. It had never started with a billionaire. It had never started with a rumor. It had started with a woman who refused to treat anyone differently, and a man who discovered that being seen as ordinary